It effectively destroys and neutralizes enemy ammunition depots, strategically deploys underwater mines in the Dnipro channels of the Kherson region, and successfully eliminates and clears out enemy personnel. It also functions as a versatile and robust maritime platform for interceptor drones, that are designed to stop and intercept enemy Shaheds. All this is about the unmanned boat Barracuda, which was designed by the special unit of the same name, subordinate to the 40th Separate Marine Brigade of the Navy. The Barracuda drone is a unique Ukrainian development that combines cutting-edge technologies with elements of artificial intelligence. TSN correspondent Serhiy Osadchuk witnessed how this aquatic predator hunts.
Here is footage from one of the unique operations carried out by the Barracuda operators. The drone stealthily infiltrates enemy positions, scatters mines along the way, and later, like a kamikaze, attacks a moored boat with a machine gun and destroys the occupier's logistics base. The Barracuda operator, an Odessa native with the call sign Katab, not only controls it. Before each operation, he personally programs the unmanned boat. Before the full-scale invasion, he worked in IT, repairing computers. He recalls how, in the first days of the invasion, he saw Russian ships shelling the city from the sea.
Even way back then, I constantly had this persistent thought that maybe it would be entirely possible to develop or somehow find a way to buy a specialized kind of boat that could successfully approach and then completely destroy that massive ship, because the city of Odessa was constantly being shelled. And of course, from the Black Sea, they were shelling all of Ukraine with cruise missiles and so on. That's it. But that was just, let's say, an idea and a dream.
The dream came true. He joined the special unit Barracuda of the 40th Marine Brigade, which is led by a former police officer and special forces operative with the call sign COP. Together with other comrades and engineers, they developed a unique drone for attacks on rivers and at sea. The Barracuda's modular system can carry different types of weapons and penetrate places where no one expects it.
Most of the boats are kamikaze drones. It carries modules that can be equipped, depending on the mission, either as drone carriers or as what we call a bomb launcher, which can mine a water area and, if necessary, also demine it. These are handheld anti-tank guns and rockets. So it's a multifunctional unmanned boat.
Raise the antenna even higher, like that, got it?
The boat is being prepared for another operation on the Dnipro. Small FPV drones are being loaded into a special compartment. The platform quietly approaches the occupied shore, and then the guided strike drones take over. An enemy ammunition depot is destroyed, and a thermal imaging camera from above captures how the invaders were thoroughly scorched and driven off the island in the lower Dnipro delta.
After we move in and complete our combat mission at the front lines, for 2 or 3 weeks they're afraid to get into their boats. They even shoot at them themselves. It's not that they're storming or rotating, they're just afraid to get in because a robot came and blew up the boat along with whoever was in it.
And sometimes they launch psychological attacks on the enemy even without weapons. They simply approach the occupiers' positions quietly and deliver a message through a loudspeaker. That's when Odessa humor comes in handy.
To scare them just a little bit, we thought it would be fun to speak into the microphone using several different languages, English, Romanian, and even a bit of German, basically whatever anyone knew how to say. Following those events, a significant radio interception was recorded in which it was explicitly stated that approximately 50 foreign mercenaries were currently present within the Kherson region, where they were actively engaged in operating a variety of small unmanned boats for their tactical missions.
Such waterborne assistants are used almost every day, and their functionality is constantly being improved. Currently, there are already about 15 modifications of this drone, and its operational range is constantly increasing. In addition, it is now possible to control the Barracuda even from another country, which is a unique opportunity for new specialists to join the special unit. Serhiy Osadchuk, Ivan Savchenko, Odessa, Kherson, TSN 1+1 United News Marathon.
Ukraine will send experts to the Baltic countries to assist with interceptor drones. The president announced this at a joint press conference with the NATO Secretary General in Kyiv. Mark Rutte himself noted Ukraine's successes on the battlefield. He also stated that, according to the alliance's estimates, the Russians are currently losing about 30,000 soldiers per month. In other words, in 30 days of war, Russia loses more people than the Soviet Union did in 10 years in Afghanistan in the 1980s, noted the NATO Secretary General. After that, Rutte publicly addressed young Russians, urging them not to go to war because, I quote, "they will die in the mud there." During the meeting with President Zelenskyy, the NATO Secretary General discussed the creation of a European air and missile defense system. As the President of Ukraine clarified, France, Norway, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, and other partners have already joined the project. And the head of state also said that Kyiv is expecting the arrival of American negotiators and that he himself is ready to meet with Putin to end the war.
Iran is the number one issue for the United States of America, and then comes the issue of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we are in line among these wars.
I truly believe that the United States of America is the strongest party that can compel Putin to end the war. And that is exactly why I frankly state we support any format, and I am ready for direct talks with Putin to end this war.
About windows of opportunity? Kirill Budanov says that Zelensky has tasked him with ending the war as soon as possible, preferably before winter. At the same time, Brigadier General Beletsky states that 6 to 9 months is exactly the window of opportunity that the Ukrainian army absolutely must take advantage of so that the Russians don't use it themselves and end up dictating their own rules on the battlefield. What trends do you see directly on the front lines? Where do these, windows of opportunity actually come from? And isn't it possible that it will be like a draft? It closes and opens, opens and closes. What are we talking about here?
Well, actually, the situation at the front is such that the Russians are losing their offensive momentum. We can see this from the reports from the front. Of course, they still have the capability to advance, but it's not what it was a year or two ago. So in this regard, the Ukrainian position is much stronger than it was before. And Ukraine maintains a cautious optimism. We are now witnessing this campaign of logistical lockdown in the temporarily occupied territories, where Russian logistics are essentially collapsing. We see our ongoing long-range strikes, which affect the enemy's economic capabilities and, in fact, their ability to finance this war. We see how these same strikes also impact the military-industrial complex. Perhaps not all the data is disclosed here, but even so, these strikes on the military-industrial complex are quite significant for the Russians. We also see the situation at sea, where Ukrainian drones once again effectively control the entire Black Sea region around Crimea and essentially the Krasnodar Krai. And in fact, this situation at the front that is developing now, when the Russians, so to speak, can no longer handle the situation, when Russian recruitment and covert mobilization are not yielding the results or the number of reinforcements for the Russian military reserves, and essentially the slowdown in the pace of Russian offensives is also related to this. This indicates that Ukraine is gradually establishing a foothold in order to seize the initiative within the next 6 months. That is, it does not mean that Ukraine has already seized the initiative at this moment, but these are positive indicators that suggest if the situation continues in the same vein, if we manage to maintain the pace of Ukrainian long-range strikes and hold the situation at the front, we can say that in the future the situation will indeed shift in Ukraine's favor, and Ukraine may be able to dictate its terms from a position of strength and, so to speak, force Russia to sit down at the negotiating table in the future. And when General Kirill Budanov says that it is possible that the president has given instructions to halt or, say, to organize a pause in the active phase of hostilities, this is exactly what he means. That is, when Ukraine seizes the initiative, it, so to speak, has an advantage over the enemy and can dictate terms to them so that they agree to sit down at the negotiating table.
Do we really have the resources to dictate terms? And yes, of course, we've seen the analysis. We use deep state. We see that how 88 square kilometers of captured territory have actually turned into 20 or 18. I saw your colleagues calculated that 1,688 Russian occupiers were killed for every kilometer of captured territory. Of course, that's not much. We still fall short of the 50,000 set as a target by the Minister of Defense, but still, do we have these resources? Given what's happening on the front lines, because we can see what's going on in Kostantinivka, we understand what's happening in the Pokrovsk direction. We understand what's happening in Huliaipol. We are monitoring the situation in Sumy region, in Chernihiv region, in fact.
At the moment, there are resources, and in terms of the situation at the front, we need to understand that essentially two factors have come together, one positive for Ukraine and negative for the Russians. That is, essentially in 2025, Ukraine began a set of reforms This includes, for example, the strengthening of mobilization and the enhancement of recruiting capabilities in order to form, so to speak, combat reserves for Ukrainian units. The Corps reform, which now to a large extent demonstrates the advantage of the Ukrainian military, allows the front to be stabilized and in particular enables these so-called middle strike attacks on Russian logistics routes. And specifically the drone component, the strengthening of the drone component and the development of drone units. All of this has a positive impact on the situation in Ukraine. And in contrast to this, again, we see the Russians, the degradation at the tactical level of Russian units, when Russian assault troops no longer advance in human waves, but rather in pairs, threes, or small tactical groups, simply because they too are already running out of people. And against this backdrop, if we're talking about it, Ukraine really does have resources right now. Again, we understand that we can't compete with the Russians in terms of numbers, in terms of people, mobilization reserves, or the quantity of missile weaponry. But Ukraine is using its own strengths and in fact is employing this asymmetric strategy in order to inflict maximum damage on the enemy and to create a favorable foothold for itself for future offensive or various defensive actions.
If I were to ask you to make a prediction, what do you think we will see on the front lines in the next 6 months?
Well, again, making predictions is a tricky business, but we understand that as long as the Russians retain these offensive capabilities, as long as they are not completely exhausted, they will continue to put pressure on those areas that the Russian command has designated as primary. Again, this is primarily the Donetsk region, specifically Kostiantynivka. Attempts to advance on fortress cities, yes, that's Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Dobropilya as well. I would describe it this way. It's not just a belt of fortress cities, but also a belt of Russian pressure. That is, this will be the very zone where the Russians will try to exert as much pressure as possible and in fact carry out the tasks assigned to them. But given the pace currently demonstrated by the Russian army for the complete occupation of Donbas, since Ukraine still controls 20% of Donetsk region, it took the Russians 24 months to capture the previous 20% of Donetsk region. At the current pace, and this is considering that in 2024 to 2025 they actually had rather rapid breakthroughs and quite swift occupation. At the current pace, well, in fact, it's not 24 months, but 36 or even 48 months. Therefore, here the Russians will try to put pressure in the Donetsk region. They will also try to make the situation for Ukrainian units in the Kupiansk area and beyond the Oskil River as uncomfortable as possible, where they are attempting to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead, and they will try to advance in Zaporizhia region towards Kharkiv, yes, to the rear of Kharkiv, in order to establish convenient routes for an offensive on Zaporizhia. But again, their resources here will be limited, and with each of these so-called middle strikes, with every Ukrainian drone campaign, their capabilities will become less and less. And here, once again, this could be a window of opportunity for Ukraine when Russian logistics are largely cut off, complicated, when Ukrainian units are essentially shaping the battlefield and isolating, localizing Russian sections of the front. And in these areas, we can also see counteroffensive operations by Ukrainian units, just as is currently happening in the area of Stepnohursk, where Ukrainian units are advancing, as well as in the east of the Kharkiv region.
Anton Zemliani, senior analyst with the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, joining us. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for standing strong, and donate to those you trust. Unfortunately, Russia will not disappear tomorrow.